Hello everyone, peace be upon you. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and stay with me until the end of the story. Also, leave a comment telling me which city and country you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story has reached. For those of you who have already subscribed, I sincerely wish you good health, ease in all your affairs, abundant blessings, and may all your hopes and dreams come true. Amen. Now, let's begin the story. They stepped off the truck at Fort Glenridge before midnight, no ceremony, no crowd, just a brief nod from the duty officer and a green light on the hangar wall. Drew Callahan ran through the plan one last time. Infiltrate Redwood Valley National Forest. Confirm the location of a weapons cache rumored to be feeding cells across the coast. Get pictures. Get coordinates. Get out. Simple on paper. Never simple in the field. Mick Alvarez cracked a tight grin as he shouldered the M249. Light jog, boys. Nobody laughed. J.T. Miller checked his tablet, then looked at Hayes. Comms check. Hayes raised 2 fingers. Clear for now. Ethan Briggs pulled point, night vision already down, boots hitting wet ground with quiet steps. Johnson Reed hung back near Hayes, a med kit strapped to his chest. They moved in a staggered line off the service road and into the timber. The air cooled 10 degrees once the redwood swallowed them. Tall trunks, high canopy, deep shade. Their world narrowed to the hiss of breath in a mask, the soft click of a safety lever, the dull thump of hearts that knew the drill. The dirt held yesterday's rain. Every step sank and held, which was good for sound and bad for speed. 200 yards in, Hayes lost the first bar of radio. He shook his head and tapped his headset, then gave Drew a thumb sideways. Weak, he whispered. Drew nodded and pointed forward. The route was marked on JT's tablet, contour lines, creek crossings, a ridge line labeled Echo Ridge where they could see down into a basin. The tablet flickered. The GPS snapped left, then corrected. JT exhaled through his nose. Canopies choking satellites, he murmured. We'll dead reckon as needed. Briggs kept them on azimuth, checking the compass on his watch and the way the slope pulled underfoot. Signs of people showed up in small ways. Cigarette ash ground into the mud near a stump. A boot print with a distinctive tread not issued by their side. The faint smell of cold smoke moving sideways on a breeze. Mick muttered, "We're not the only night shift." Drew raised a fist and the line froze. They watched the trees and listened. The valley breathed around them. Water somewhere ahead. No voices. No metal clink. After 30 seconds, Drew rolled his fist and they moved again. They hit the river Clearwater where the map said it would be, louder than expected this time of year. The crossing spot was a set of slick boulders that looked easy until the water pushed against their shins and tried to take their balance. Briggs went first with a line, clipped it off, and waved them through. Halfway across, Hayes slipped and jammed a knee, his radio smacking the rock and splashing. He saved the radio. The splash carried. Every head turned upstream, then downstream. Nothing. Water pressed on. They got across and crouched in the brush, counting breaths until their hands stopped shaking. Comms dropped to static 30 minutes later. Hayes tried secondary, then tertiary. Nothing. He looked at Drew and kept his voice even. Line of sight only. No birds. Drew let the frustration hit, then set it aside. We stay on the plan. Pictures, coordinates, Exfil West. If it goes bad, we fall to Camp Horizon. JT added, we keep the river to our south on the way out. Briggs marked a tree with a tiny notch low to the ground, a breadcrumb only they would notice. The deeper they went, the thicker the fog banked. NVGs sprinkled with sparkle and static. The trail narrowed to a game path that forced them single file. Twice Briggs went to a knee, and twice Drew saw what he saw, fresh footprints, 3 men, moving east to west, wait on the outside edges, not hikers. They waited and let the night move. A low chuckle drifted from somewhere ahead and left, then the buzz of a cheap radio in a pocket. Drew shook his head at Mick before the gunner could ask. No engagement unless it was forced. By 0300 they crested a low spur and saw a faint break in the trees below. JT slid beside Drew and angled the tablet so only they could see. Clearing should be there. If the intel holds, the cache sits on the north side under tarps. Briggs scanned through the scope. Movement. 2 sentries. Maybe more in the shadows. Crates under a rigged tarp near a shack. Hayes inched up and started snapping silent photos with the IR illuminator blocked. The shapes resolved into real things, ammo cans, fuel drums, stacked crates stenciled with a language none of them spoke. Drew's jaw tightened. More bodies than briefed. Mick counted under his breath. Not a pickup crew. That's a roster. JT nodded once. We don't shop here. We confirm and leave. They rotated through glass and camera, each man doing his job without a word wasted. Briggs tracked a pair of patrolmen crossing a trail they had used an hour earlier. He didn't like that. He said so in a low voice. Drew filed it next to the other red flags, the river splash, the vanishing comms, the doubled head count, the fresh prints angling wrong. They backed off the spur to retrace a safer arc. The forest sound changed. Not louder. Just tighter, like someone turned a dial and closed in the space. Hayes froze, head tilted, then whispered, "Do you hear that?" At first there was nothing. Then a faint metal scrape, the whisper of cloth on bark, a shoe sole grinding grit. JT raised 2 fingers and chopped them left. Alternate route. Briggs set the turn. They moved 30 yards and found a snare wire anchored low. Not for animals. Fresh, oiled, positioned for a human shin. Mick's grin vanished. They're shaping the ground. Drew kept his tone level. Eyes at dirt and waste. No hero steps. They threaded the traps and made the ridge line only to find the wind wrong and the fog thicker. The plan said exfil west after the photos. The ground now said pick a fight or find a hole. Hayes tried the radio again and shook his head. Static. He looked at Johnson and saw the medic tightening his straps like he could feel trouble crawling up the back of his neck. They took a knee in a shallow depression choked with ferns. Drew ran the team through quick checks. Ammo count. Water. Battery. Injury. Nobody admitted anything worse than a bruise and a dinged knee. He felt the pull to push hard for the river and the extraction point. He also felt the hook of a trap laid by someone patient. He looked at JT, and the other man read it the same way. We're not alone out here, JT said. They know the ground. Briggs added, and they know we're here. Drew adjusted the route one more time. We skirt Echo Ridge, stay high, then drop to the river west of here. We move slow. We keep it quiet. If we're made, we fight on our feet and break contact fast. Mick settled the M249 into a ready carry and nodded. Hayes slid his radio back into the pouch with a quiet sigh. Johnson flexed his hands and tested his grip. The plan wasn't pretty, but it was theirs. They eased out of the ferns and started a careful climb. The fog ate the sound of their boots, but it also ate distance and time. Each tree looked like the last. Each shadow looked like a man. Briggs raised a fist and they dropped low as a flashlight beam swept the slope 30 yards below. Voices followed, low and clipped. The beam moved on. Drew counted to 10, then 20, then 30. He signaled, wait, because his gut said the light would swing back, and it did, a slow sweep designed to catch anyone impatient. They stayed flat until the beam faded for good. When they finally reached the shoulder below Echo Ridge, the sky had shifted one shade lighter. Not dawn. Just the kind of gray that tricks tired eyes. JT checked the tablet again and didn't bother hiding his frown. Drifted east. We need to correct. Hayes opened his mouth to answer and stopped. A crisp, single sound clipped the air from somewhere above and right. Not thunder. Not a branch. The kind of sound men remember. Drew felt it in his chest before his ears finished the job. He lifted a hand, but the moment had already turned. Somewhere in the trees, something waited, and the night was done being kind. A muzzle flash pulsed from the tree lean above Echo Ridge, and the round snapped bark inches from Briggs's ear. Contact, he hissed as everyone hit the dirt. The slope erupted in crossfire, short, controlled bursts from angles they hadn't clocked on the way up. Drew didn't waste a second. Break left, use the rocks. Mick, lay it down. The M249 coughed a hard rhythm, chewing a lane through brush. Hayes dragged Johnson into the shadow of a fallen trunk while JT pushed smoke forward to hide their shift. 2 canisters rolled, soft pops, then a white wall crawled uphill. They moved in pairs, low and fast. Round sliced ferns and smacked into wood with ugly thuds. Briggs took a knee, picked a muzzle and double-tapped. A body folded behind a stump. More voices shouted in a language they didn't know, tight and disciplined. This wasn't a blind militia volley. These guys were working a plan. Drew felt the pattern, their left edge was probing, right edge pinning with volume. They're trying to funnel us into the draw, he snapped. JT checked the map, glanced at the terrain, and nodded. If we go down, we lose the ridge and the river owns us. Hayes tried the radio again. Static ate his call. He switched to a low-power burst and got a blip of life, then dead air. No joy. Johnson grunted, hand pressing a dark patch on his thigh. I'm good, he lied. Hayes didn't argue. He tightened the tourniquet and pushed a clotting pad, then shoved pain aside and shouldered his rifle. Mick shifted fire as tracers started skimming in. He ducked. Heavy on the right. They're setting a gun. Drew saw the shape of it, 2 men hauling a tripod, 1 feeding a belt. He lined up, squeezed, hit the loader. Briggs finished the gunner. The tripod tumbled, clanging on rock. The pressure didn't drop. More boots hit the line above them. Shadows cut through smoke in 2s and 3s, bounding tactics tight as a drum. These guys trained, Briggs growled. Another burst cracked the log over Johnson's head. Splinters peppered his face, he stayed quiet, jaw set. JT slid into Drew's shoulder. We can't sit here. They'll bracket us with grenades. As if on cue, a metal clink bounced in. Drew didn't think. He shoved Hayes and Johnson deeper under the trunk and threw his plate carrier toward the sound as the frag went off. The blast smacked the ground, lifting dirt and leaves. Ears rang. Hayes blinked hard and shook it off. Up, up. Drew barked. The team surged, shifting across the slope toward a rock spine that promised a little elevation and a little angle. Mick's barrel went dry. He slapped in a new belt, slammed the cover, and brought the gun back online. Moving. Briggs called, and Mick stitched a burst to cover him. JT took a glance over the ridge and saw a shadow team racing to cut their exit. They're flanking wide left. Drew set his jaw. We stopped the left, then punched through center before they reset. It was ugly, but it was the only way out. They hit the spine and the air opened for a second. 2 silhouettes crested low and fast, rifles first. Briggs caught the first in the chest. JT hammered the second. Hayes counted his rounds. 2 mags, he said, out of habit. Mick's answer was short. 1 belt and a prayer. Johnson breathed shallow, color off. I'm still here. Drew scanned through the smoke and fog, hunting a sign of the squad leaders. He found one by behavior, a man pointing, checking, not spraying. Drew steadied and pressed. The leader dropped. The line wobbled, but didn't break. The next push came hard. Rounds raked the rocks, chips flew like bees. A grenade landed short and cracked open dirt in front of them. The shockwave shoved air through their chests. Briggs coughed and wiped grit from his teeth. They're not rushing. They're bleeding us. JT agreed. Ammo math kills us first. Hayes checked the skyline, then the ground. If we slide along this spine another 30 yards, we can angle toward the saddle. After that, we either run into their reserve or we get a seam. Drew nodded. We take the saddle. They bounded again. Mick anchored, then moved under Briggs's cover. Hayes and JT hauled Johnson between them. Voices spiked to their right, a team burst from a pocket like they'd been sitting on a countdown. Close range, bad angle. Drew stepped into it, fired tight pairs, felt the recoil settle, moved his muzzle a foot, fired again. 2 down. 1 kept coming until Briggs put him flat. Left clear, Briggs said, breath thin. Not clear, but not immediately suicide. They made the saddle and took a lung of colder air. The fog thinned. For a heartbeat, everything slowed. Drew could see the basin shape beyond the trees, a darker smear where the river cut the valley. He could also see movement, more of it than they had bullets for. The enemy had numbers and time. The team had skill and grit. The math still stunk. Mick set the gun on his knee and scanned. I can hold this lane for a minute. Maybe 2. Hayes didn't look up. We don't have 2. A whistle cut through the trees. Fire increased instantly, coordinated, like a switch flipped. Rounds hammered rock. 1 caught Johnson's plate with a hard slap that knocked the wind out of him. He wheezed, eyes squeezing shut, then forced them open. JT flinched as a shard nicked his cheek. Stay on task, he told himself more than anyone. He pointed with 2 fingers. There. That stump. If we can get Mick there, he'll own the approach for 30 yards. They moved again. The shift was messy. Hayes stumbled under Johnson's weight. Briggs caught them before they went down, then felt a line of heat across his bicep, graze only. Still pretty, he muttered, and Hayes somehow barked a laugh. It died fast when a new sound rolled across the slope, a deeper cough from a belt fed they hadn't suppressed. The rounds chewed a trench into the dirt next to Mick's elbow. He yanked the gun back and swore. They set another pig. Drew's vision narrowed. If that gun locked, they were done. He sighted on the muzzle flash and couldn't get a clean line, too many branches, too much angle. JT threw a 40mm high and right. The thump was honest and the detonation tore a chunk from the nest. The belt fed went quiet. A scream followed, then new voices filled the gap. The line hesitated. Go now, Drew said. No one argued. They surged the last 10 yards and threw themselves into shallow cover behind the big stump. The position wasn't perfect, but it gave Mick a lane and gave the rest a place to breathe for 3 breaths. Hayes checked Johnson again. The bleeding slowed. The pain didn't. Birds would be nice, Mick said, half to the sky. Hayes tried the radio like a ritual. Static answered like a bad joke. Another whistle. Another push. The enemy came in tighter, angrier, less careful. Mick hammered the lane, forcing heads down. Briggs and JT picked edges, taking the ones who thought they were invisible. Drew counted rounds and time together and didn't like either. We've got to make them pay for the next 30 seconds, he said. Then we break contact downhill to the west, angle to the river, and pray Camp Horizon hears us when the ridge opens. The forest answered with another grenade, this one close enough to draw blood from ears. The world went tinny and small. In that ringing bubble, Hayes saw motion at the extreme edge of their flank, 2 shapes ghosting through brush, smarter than the rest, aiming to get behind the stump. He shouted and fired, dropped one. The other vanished. Silence fell wrong for half a heartbeat. Then a single, sharp rifle crack cut the night from somewhere beyond their map, clean and final. A man who had been about to throw fell like a string was cut, grenade tumbling harmlessly into a dip. Everyone froze for a sliver of time, including the enemy, like the sound didn't belong to this fight. Drew's eyes snapped toward the dark ridge they hadn't cleared. He didn't see a face. He saw only the effect, one threat removed with surgical certainty. "Who the?" Mick started, but another crisp shot answered from a different angle, and another attacker folded behind a cedar. The push stuttered. JT met Drew's eyes. Neither said the word that hung between them. They just used the window. "Move," Drew ordered, steady and cold. "Use the gift. West to the river. Now." And under the echo of that unseen rifle, the team slid out of the kill box they hadn't chosen, chasing a seam that might be their only way home, and Drew treated it like a lifeline, not a promise. "Stay low, follow me," he said, and the team slid off the stump's cover into a shallow trough that angled west. Mick kept the gun tucked tight, barrel forward, eyes cutting for threats. Hayes and JT hauled Johnson in a rhythm they'd learned on long days and worse nights. Briggs floated on the flank, checking rear and edges, ready to punch holes when the line snapped back. The enemy recovered faster than anyone wanted. Shouts rose behind them, angrier now, boots finding tempo through brush. A shot cracked from the ridge again, clean, distant, confident, and the first man chasing them pitched forward without a sound. Drew didn't look up. He didn't ask for help he couldn't control. He took it, and he kept moving. "Left bend ahead," JT warned. "We ride it to the saddle, then cut down." Hayes grunted an answer, breath tight. Johnson's weight wasn't much, but pain made him heavy. "I can walk," Johnson insisted. "Not yet," Hayes said. "You walk when we're not dying." They skimmed the contour and dropped 2 feet into firmer ground. The fog swirled and thinned for a moment, showing the dark shoulder of Echo Ridge to their right and the deeper basin ahead. The river was still only a sound, a steady rush that promised both cover and a trap if they got pinned on its banks. A round pinged rock near Mick's hip and whined away. He didn't stop. "Keep going," he said in a voice that was more order than request to himself. The push from behind came in waves. A rush. A stall. A probe at their left. The unseen rifle answered in a rhythm that felt strategic, not lucky. A leader went down. A gun started to set and then clattered into the ferns. A flanker got inside 20 yards and folded before Briggs could pivot. "She's screening our gaps," JT said, almost to himself. Drew let the fact sit in his head without emotion. Whoever was out there was good and generous with skill. It didn't change the plan. Plans only changed for ground, bullets, and blood. They hit the saddle and cut down through a narrow slot between roots. The slope wanted to dump them fast, they fought for balance and speed at the same time. Hayes lost a footing and slid, dragging Johnson half a yard before Briggs caught the medic's plate carrier and hauled him upright. "Thanks," Hayes said, and Briggs only nodded. Above them, voices spread wider. The pursuers were committing numbers now, trying to keep contact no matter what their mystery shooter did to their lead men. A rifle cracked again. Then another, from slightly left. The shooter wasn't staying still. She was moving with them, or ahead of them, bouncing positions like she had built this ridge herself. A grenade arced from the tree lean behind and right, ugly wobble, short fuse. Mick saw it, swore, and kicked it into a washout at the last second. The blast punched air up the trench and showered them with dirt. "Keep going," Drew repeated. "Don't let them settle." At 200 yards downhill the ground leveled into a narrow bench. Good footing, bad exposure. They crossed it fast, heads down. Fire fanned from the right. Briggs snapped 2, dropped 1 silhouette, then felt a hot bite rip across his sleeve. "Graze," he said out loud, more to keep his hand steady than to inform. Hayes was counting rounds by feel now. "One mag," he warned. "Mick?" "Half a belt," Mick said. "I'll make it act like two." JT pointed with his chin. "Break in the trees ahead. That's our slide to the river." They were 20 yards from the slide when the enemy tried a full-body tackle of a push. 10 men, tight, loud, trying to get inside the flinch zone. The bench popped with muzzle flashes. Drew anchored his feet and shot fast but disciplined. JT followed his cadence. Briggs found heads, shoulders, exposed thighs, anything that ended a step. Hayes put 3 into a chest that wouldn't stop moving. The line held because it had to. Then the crisp rifle from the ridge took the last man in that wave just as he lifted something metallic. The object thudded harmlessly and rolled backward. "No blast." "Smoke," Hayes said. "They were about to blind us." The relief was tiny and temporary. "Down the slide," Drew ordered. They dropped into a dirt chute cut by runoff, half running, half falling, grabbing roots to control the fall. The river noise grew, a constant bed of white that almost masked the shouts above. The ground spit them out behind a screen of sword ferns where the bank cut steep. The water was dark and fast, stuffed with cold and bad ideas. The crossing spot wasn't here. The bank was too high, the current too strong. JT scanned left and right and made the call. 200 left, shallower bar. Drew nodded and set the angle. The first man from the chasing line to reach the bench above the slide never fired. Another single shot snapped him back onto the dirt. The rest stopped for just a second, long enough for the team to gain space. "She's buying seconds," JT said. "Spend them," Drew answered. They sprinted the bank path, knees high, boots grabbing mud. Mick's breath rasped in a rough metronome. Johnson's jaw locked so he wouldn't groan. Hayes kept his hand on the tourniquet and his head on the path. Briggs floated rear again, eyes slicing the bluffs for angles. They found the gravel bar where the river threw a pale tongue into the bank. It wasn't friendly, but it was possible. 3 at a time, Drew said. Mick anchors. Briggs covers rear. JT, Hayes, Johnson with me. No one argued. They went in and cold knifed up their calves like the river hated heat. The current shoved, harder than the first crossing, harder than pride. Hayes kept a hand on Johnson's rig and a hand on his own rifle and split his attention the way he'd done since day one. Drew planted every step. JT stole glances upstream for drift and downstream for trouble. Halfway across, the enemy found angles that mattered again. Rounds flicked the water into tiny spouts. Drew didn't look back. "Keep moving," he said, steady. Then a round hit rock upstream and tagged a chip into Hayes's cheek. He didn't even wipe it. Almost there. On the opposite bank, Drew hauled Johnson up and pushed him behind a fallen tree. JT turned to cover the rest. Mick and Briggs were still on the near bank, sprinting toward the waterline. The ridge rifle cracked once more, and a man who had found a perfect angle to rake the crossing folded over his gun. The pressure eased exactly 1 notch, exactly long enough. Mick stumbled at midstream. Briggs caught him by the sling and dragged him 3 steps while Mick reset his feet. "I had it," Mick said through his teeth. "Sure," Briggs said, without heat. They hit the far bank, and the team piled into thin cover. The firing from the far side slowed. Not because they'd beaten the pursuers, but because the pursuers were rethinking their lives as someone they couldn't see reached out and swatted hands every time they grabbed an advantage. "Ammo," Drew said. They did a fast count, honest this time. Low meant low. "We keep moving west," JT said. "The canopy thins and we might get a bounce to Camp Horizon." Hayes keyed the radio and tried again. The hiss wavered, then kicked up a ghost of a tone. "Nothing solid." "Almost," he said. We need open sky. Drew looked up through the branches. The redwoods thinned a little. Not enough. We climb to that break, he said. 50 yards. We try again. If it fails, we move and try again. They shifted into the trees and climbed. The gunfire behind them turned to frustrated shots, less controlled. The command voices got sharper. Someone had lost people they valued. The Ridge rifle stayed quiet for a full minute. Long enough for the team to feel alone again. Then, just as Hayes reached for the radio, another precise crack reached them from farther west than before. The sound told a story. Your guardian isn't behind you anymore. She's in front, carving the path you haven't seen yet. Hayes swallowed. Try now. Drew nodded. Hayes keyed up. Static grabbed, then broke. A thin voice cut through, chewed by distance. Guardian, this is Falcon. Read. Hayes closed his eyes for half a breath. Falcon, Guardian 2-1. Heavy contact, multiple Kia enemy, one wounded friendly, grid to follow. The line sputtered but held. Copy, Guardian. Bird spinning. Mark LZ. Hayes looked at Drew, and for the first time all night, hope felt heavier than fear. They still had to earn it. The enemy wasn't done. The river still curled like a trap. But a door had opened. Move, Drew said, not smiling, not relaxing. We meet our ghost at Echo Ridge, or we make our own ridge. Either way, we keep going. And somewhere ahead, beyond the next fold of trees, the rifle that did not miss waited for them to take the lane it kept cutting. One shot at a time was the lane, and Drew took it like a man counting steps on a collapsing bridge. We move on her rhythm, he said, voice low. When she cracks, we shift. The team climbed toward the break in the canopy, 50 yards that felt like a mile with lungs burning and legs heavy. Hayes kept the radio pressed to his ear. Falcon's reply was thin but alive. Guardian, estimate 20 out. 20 minutes. It sounded like forever. A crisp rifle report cut the air from ahead and right. An enemy scout tipped out of a tree crotch and fell hard. Shift, Drew ordered, and they slid left across a shallow shelf of rock. Branches raked plates. Boots slid. JT pointed with 2 fingers. Echo Ridge shoulder, 2 contours up. If we hold that for 5, we can mark an LZ in the basin. Mick didn't look up. Hold for 5, die in 4, he muttered, then bit down on the thought and moved. The push behind them thickened again. Whoever commanded the pursuers understood the window and wanted it closed. Whistles. New angles. Rounds bit bark in front and behind, like teeth. Briggs took rear, found a face in the shadow and erased it, then ducked as splinters sprayed his helmet. Hayes checked Johnson's tourniquet, tightened it a quarter turn, and got a nod that was more grit than comfort. Birds are inbound, Hayes said. Johnson breathed out through his nose. Then we're not dying here. They hit the shoulder below Echo Ridge and the world opened just enough to see a geometry of trees and fog and lanes. Drew dropped to a knee and cut their sectors. Mick, gun on that notch. JT, left arc Briggs, right arc Hayes, radio and rifle. I'll float. The unseen rifle cracked again, but the sound came from a new place, higher, farther west, almost over the ridge. Then another sound answered from the opposite side, lower, meaner, with a long, ugly echo. JT stiffened. Counter-sniper, he said. They brought one. The first dual shot whipped a chip out of the rock by Hayes's cheek. He dropped flat and didn't move for 2 beats. He's glassing our glass. Briggs slid his scope a fraction. Left of the cedar snag, 30 degrees down from the skylight. He's patient. The clean rifle, their ghost, didn't answer right away. The pause stretched. The enemy line crept closer, Boulder with a long gun keeping their heads up. Drew felt the pull to push, and resisted. "Hold," he said. "Let her work." The answer came in two parts. First, a decoy shot from far left, a snap that drew the counter-sniper's twitch and a half-inch of muzzle rise. Second, the real round, from high and center, surgical and final. The counter-sniper thumped back into brush and went still. Mick exhaled through his teeth. She played him. Hayes almost smiled. "We owe her more than a thank you." The reprieve lasted seconds. The enemy charged, anger covering fear. 10, then 15, using smoke and noise, trying to flood the shoulder. Mick hammered the notch, short bursts, controlled, cutting knees and hips. JT worked the left edge like a metronome. Briggs took the right and made every round change a mind. Drew floated, picking leaders by posture, not noise. The line held and bucked and held again. "Guardian, Mark LZ," Falcon said, voice stronger now. Hayes popped a flare from a pocket but held it. "We shoot that now, they zero it," he warned. Drew nodded. "We burn it when we hear rotors." Falcon again, "Be advised, you're hot. We'll do a two-ship fast rope touch." 30 seconds on the ground. 30 seconds was a lifetime and a blink. A grenade landed short and rolled. Mick kicked it back on instinct and swore when it cooked off 3 yards out, showering them with dirt and the sharp smack of overpressure. Johnson grunted but stayed conscious. Hayes pressed a palm to his chest plate. "Stay with me." Johnson breathed, "Still here." JT scanned his tablet, "No GPS, just habit. 2 minutes to the ridge crown if we sprint." Drew shook his head. "We sprint when blades cover noise." The forest answered with more fire, less discipline. Their ghost cracked a shot that cut a charge in half. Another round took a squad leader mid-shout. The push sagged for 3 seconds. Drew spent all 3. "Shift up 10 and reset," he barked. "Go." They crawled the last yardage like thieves under a stage, hands finding roots, knees finding rock. The crown of Echo Ridge gave them something like a view and something like a drop. The basin to the west opened into a tear in the trees where a black hawk might thread a needle. Hayes risked the flare as the first thump of rotors trembled through the leaves. He popped red and waved waist-high, not shoulder, not head, just enough for air crews to see and ground shooters to miss. The sound of the birds rolled in like weather, beat by beat, growing, flattening brush and raising the hair on the back of every neck. The enemy heard it too. Their push spiked into reckless. "Last rush," Drew said, tone iron. "Make them pay for every foot." Mick set the gun to a low tripod of rock and let the lane burn in 10-round pulses. Briggs went to irons to save the last of his glass. JT shot until the bolt locked, slammed a mag, shot again. Hayes kept one eye on the sky, one on the right. Johnson propped himself and covered low. The first Black Hawk punched through the gap, nose high, door gun already spitting. The second hung back, timing a stagger. Rotor wash tore the fog and turned it into smoke ribbons. The door gunner raked the tree lean, carving space. "Guardian, 30 seconds. Falcon yelled. "Go, go. Bound." Drew shouted. He and JT moved first, low and fast, dropping into the small flat the crew had picked by miracle or map. Hayes and Johnson came next, then Briggs, then Mick with the gun, stepping backward, firing until the belt ran dry and the feed tray snapped open on nothing. He tossed the gun to his shoulder and ran. An enemy fighter broke through brush at 10 yards, eyes wide, rifle high. He would have cut Mick in half if the crisp rifle hadn't thundered once more from the ridge flank. The fighter folded, and Mick didn't look back. "Thank you, Ghost," he breathed, not sure if she could hear it. They spilled into the rotor wash. The crew chief leaned out, hand slicing the air. "Load. Load." Drew shoved Johnson up the ramp with Hayes. JT climbed and turned to cover. Briggs hauled Mick by the plate and pushed him inside. Rounds hammered the bird's skin, ugly, metallic punches. The door gun answered. 10 seconds, the crew chief barked. Drew scanned the ridge one last time. For a heartbeat he saw a figure on stone, ghillie shoulders, rifle leveled, face lost in net and shade. She didn't wave. She didn't nod. She fired one last round that cut a charging shape out of the picture, then stepped backward and disappeared like the forest ate her. Now! Hayes yelled. Drew jumped, grabbed the strap, and the crew chief slammed the ramp. Lift. The Black Hawk clawed air, banked, and the world tilted. Trees dropped away. The second bird rose behind them, door gun painting the ridge. Smoke and fog and ash spun into a dirty spiral that shrank as they climbed. Inside, no one talked for a count of 30. Breaths were the only sound under the engine's grind. Then Mick let out a laugh that sounded like it belonged to a different day. Briggs leaned his head back and closed his eyes for 3 seconds, then opened them because closing them felt too much like letting go. Hayes checked Johnson's pulse and finally let his own shoulders drop an inch. JT stared at the floor and saw map lines in the scuffs. Drew looked out the open door at the ridge sliding away. He didn't see her again. He didn't need to. One shot at a time, she had held a line for strangers. One shot at a time, she had turned a meat grinder into a narrow road home. The radio crackled in Hayes's ear. Guardian, status. He keyed up. Falcon, Guardian. 6 souls. 1 urgent surgical. Objective confirmed. Exfil in progress. He didn't add the part that mattered to him most. Somewhere down there, a rifle that did not miss had gone quiet because its job was done, and because the night had finally given them back to the sky. The cabin felt like a different planet, hot metal, oil, and the hard thrum of survival under the rotors. Hayes held Johnson's wrist and watched the pulse climb from thin to steady. He's good, he told the crew chief. The medic leaned in, cut the pant leg, and pushed more gauze under the tourniquet. You bought him time, the medic said. Hayes just nodded and kept counting. Falcon came up clearer now that the trees were a memory. Guardian, good lift. Say status. Drew keyed his mic, 6 aboard, 1 urgent surgical, objective confirmed, enemy dispersed. Request immediate relay for fires on cache grid. JT had the photos open on his tablet, already flagging crates and a tarp line. He rattled off the grid twice. Falcon read it back, calm as if they were ordering lunch. Copy. Tasking fast movers. 10 out. The door gun pivoted and went quiet. The crew chief handed Drew a marker and pointed at a laminated basin map taped to the bulkhead. Mark your LZ and target for the jets. Drew drew a quick box around the clearing, then circled the shack and the stacks. As he capped the pen, a new voice cracked the net, clean, female, unhurried. Guardian, adjust target 20 meters north of your circle. You missed a blind. There's a secondary pit under the tarp. Everyone in the bird stilled for half a beat. Hayes glanced at Drew. Drew didn't ask who she was. He didn't need to. Copy, adjusting, he said, and drew a second circle where she called it. Falcon didn't blink at the intrusion. Guardian, paint received. Cleared hot when fast movers check in. JT leaned toward the radio. Raven, can you laze? Static. Then, negative. I'm too far and I prefer not to glow. You have the grid. The channel went quiet. Briggs let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Mick shook his head. She's on our net. Hayes half smiled despite the blood on his cheek. I'm not complaining. They dropped to Camp Horizon, a rough strip carved into the west edge of the forest that smelled like dust and JP ate. The second bird hovered as they flared. Rotors beat the weeds flat. As soon as the skids kissed, the ramp dropped and hands flooded the cabin. Medic slid Johnson onto a litter and vanished toward a tent with a red cross stenciled on canvas. Hayes followed long enough to watch a bag go up and a monitor chirp, then jogged back. "He's talking," he told Drew, and the line of Drew's shoulders loosened a notch. "Guardian, stack and hold," Falcon said. "Fast movers 1 minute." The pilot pointed over the trees. 2 dots grew into jets and smeared sound across the camp. JT pushed the tablet to the crew chief so the front seater could see it. The radio popped. "Strike 1, tally mark." Falcon cleared them. The jets rolled, dropped, and the first run stitched the clearing with steel. A beat later, a delayed throat punch told them the caches had cooked off. A column of dirty flame clawed above the canopy and sagged. People around the strip watched without cheering. It wasn't a football game. It was a job finished. Raven came back on the net like she'd never left. "Secondary done. You still have a trail cam at the West Spur. If someone's counting, you were never here." Falcon's controller beat Drew to the response. "Copy all. Appreciate the housekeeping." There was a smile in that voice, but only a little. Drew leaned toward the handset. "Raven, this is Guardian 2-1. You saved my team." Static filled the space. Then the same even tone, "Your team saved itself. I just trimmed the edges." Before anyone could add a word, she cleared herself off. Going dark. The net flattened into regular traffic again. They stayed long enough to fuel, to swap belts and mags, to wash grit out of eyes at a hose. Mick sat on a crate and held his helmet in both hands like it was an argument he'd finally won. Briggs stood by the ramp and stretched his back until something popped into place. Hayes walked to the medic tent, got a thumbs up, and brought it back like it was oxygen. "Johnson's stable," he said. "Or at Glenridge, but stable." JT looked over the photos a last time and packaged them on an encrypted drive. The crew chief sealed it in a pouch and snapped it to Drew's vest. Falcon called for a quick debrief on the radio right there, engines spooling low. "Guardian, confirm enemy composition." JT answered. "Disciplined, small unit tactics, belt feds and 40 mm, some signals discipline. Not militia quality." Mick grunted. "No kidding." Falcon, copy. "Your ghost just bought us 5 minutes on the far net. Whoever she is, she's not local." That landed and sat between all of them like a coin on a table. They lifted again for the short hop to Fort Glenridge. The forest slid by in sheets of green and gray, now broken by a thin black scar where the cache had burned. Hayes stared at the ridge and tried to pick out the exact stone where she'd stood. All he found were rocks that looked like other rocks. JT reached into a cargo pocket and felt something that hadn't been there at camp. He pulled a folded, mud-streaked index card sealed in plastic. No one had touched his pocket. He opened it anyway. Inside was a microSD taped to paper and 6 words printed in neat block letters. "Use this. Don't use names. R." He handed it to Drew. "You see anyone near me?" The crew chief held up both palms. "No one. Promise." Hayes frowned at the card, then laughed once, short and low. "She's better at logistics than we are." Drew slid the microSD into a shielded pouch without comment. He wasn't offended. He was grateful and a little out of his depth. They hit Glenridge under a sky turning pale at the edges. The bird set down, the ramp dropped, and bass noise spilled in, diesels, forklifts, a distant generator. Medics took Johnson straight to the ambulance. A staff sergeant hustled the rest toward a debrief room that smelled like coffee gone old. The major on duty kept it brisk. "You went in, got eyes, got cut off, and still came back with product. We'll read it, we'll act on it." He tapped the sealed pouch with 2 knuckles. "And we'll see what your friend sent." Mick leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. Are we going to pretend this is normal? The major looked at Drew. Drew answered for the team. It's not normal. It's real. She's out there. The major nodded once. Good enough. Off your feet, 30 minutes, then medical checks, then longer debrief. Gear turn in when your hands stopped shaking. He started to leave, then paused. And if your friend calls again, we'll listen. They broke for the hallway. Hayes pressed a cold bottle of water to the bruise on his cheek and hissed. Briggs stood at a window and watched the horizon pink up over the hills. JT hovered at the comms desk until a tech let him send a short message to the surgical bay. He didn't need a reply, he just needed to send it. Drew walked out to the flight line alone. The rotor wash had settled into dust and paper. He scanned the tree line beyond the fence even though he knew it was a habit and not a plan. A wind caught his collar and cooled the sweat at his neck. A voice from the tower came through an external speaker, routine traffic in morning light. For once, routine sounded like music. His radio chirped on a side channel he hadn't selected. One line, calm, almost conversational. Your route home is clear. Don't look back. No call sign. No location. Just the message. The channel went dead. Drew clicked once in acknowledgement and didn't try to answer. He put the radio back on his vest and stood there long enough for the sun to find the edge of the flight line and draw a thin bar of gold across the concrete. They had bled for a ridge and walked out because someone else had chosen to bleed where they couldn't. The mission was no longer a question mark. The cash was gone. His team was upright. The rest would be paperwork and stitches. He turned toward the squad bay. There would be coffee that actually tasted like coffee, a shower that made skin sting, and a quiet room where you could hear your own thoughts if you wanted to. He wasn't sure he did. Not yet. For the moment, it was enough to feel ground under boots and know the sky had kept them. And somewhere behind the redwoods, a rifle that didn't miss had gone silent again, not because the fight was finished for her, but because this chapter was closed. The next one started in the quiet ways that matter, forms filled, gear scrubbed, bruises catalogued, and a team that didn't need to talk much to know what the others were thinking. Drew stood in the squad bay with a clipboard while Mick cracked open the M249 and cleaned carbon that looked like charcoal. Briggs swapped a shredded sling. Hayes checked radios with fresh batteries and wrote a simple note on tape, works. JT handled the drive Raven had slipped them, logged it, and turned it over to Intel with a clean chain of custody. Johnson, patched and stabilized, sent a photo from post-op with 2 fingers raised and a tired grin. It wasn't victory. It was life doing its job. The debrief ran longer than anyone wanted. The major asked the right questions and ignored the wrong ones. Talk me through contact initiation. When did you lose comms? Who directed fire at Echo Ridge? No one said her name. No one had it. An unknown sniper assisted, Drew repeated, each time the question tried to become a story. Precision fire. Multiple positions. High-value targeting. The major scribbled and moved on. Copy. You'll stick to that. It wasn't a warning. It was a procedure. Outside, the day went on. Forklifts beeped. A raven, the bird, not the person, landed on a light pole and watched the flight line like it expected action. Mick pointed his chin at it. Bad omen? Hayes shook his head. Just a bird. Briggs smirked. Says the comms guy who talks to ghosts. Hayes didn't rise to it. He tilted his face into the sun and let the heat erase a little of the river's cold. Intel called them back in the afternoon. 2 analysts and a colonel with a poker face had the drive open in a secure room. No malware, no tricks. Just files, trailcam stills of the cache before the team ever left Glenridge, hand-sketched diagrams that matched what JT had drawn under stress, and a short audio clip of enemy comms that proved they'd planned the ambush for anyone crossing the Clearwater. The colonel tapped the speaker. Your ghost pulled this off their net. That's not a hobby. Drew didn't answer. He didn't have to. They slept in shifts that night even though the base was safe. Muscle memory didn't care about fences and guards. Drew woke at 0300 and walked the perimeter road because walking beats thinking most nights. He stopped at the fence line and looked toward the black shape of the trees. The rifle shots lived there somewhere, tucked into stone and fern, done working for the moment. He found himself saying a sentence under his breath like a line in a prayer, not because he was a church man, but because some words asked to be said. Thank you for the seconds. He wasn't sure who he was saying it to. It didn't matter. Morning brought orders. The team was off the line for 72 hours. Johnson would be moved to a surgical unit downstate. The cache site would be a scar on a map and a report in a folder. Command wanted a clean entry for the unknown sniper, external asset, unassigned, cooperative. JT typed it, paused, then added 2 words the colonel approved without comment, highly capable. Before noon, a brown envelope showed up in the team's ready room with no return and no signature. Inside was a single printed page. No letterhead. No flourish. 6 bullet points of straightforward advice about traveling in Redwood country and 3 coordinates labeled, "Don't go here after rain." At the bottom, a line, "Tell your medic to loosen the tourniquet after the first clotting pad. He'll keep the leg." R. Hayes held the note and let out the breath he'd been carrying. "She's still watching," he said. Mick shook his head, half smiling. "Creepy." Briggs shrugged. "Useful." Drew folded the page, slid it into a binder, and locked it away. They drove to the base hospital together when Johnson cleared visitors. He was gray but grinning, leg wrapped like a fresh cast on a car. "Tell me you brought coffee," he said. Mick produced a cup and a contraband donut like a magician. Hayes went over the timeline, not to brag, but because patients heal better with stories that make sense. Johnson listened, nodded at the right beats, and closed his eyes for a second when Hayes described the first clean crack from the ridge. "I heard that one in my bones," he said. "I thought it was the last thing I'd hear." Drew squeezed the rail. "Not today." Back at Glenridge, Supply issued new plates, new gloves, and a new tablet for JT. The quartermaster, a woman who'd seen too many rotations, slid a small pouch across the counter like it was nothing. "From comms," she said. Inside sat a slim encryption key with a tag, Arnett. Hayes looked at the clerk. She lifted a shoulder. "Came through a relay I don't control. Comms chief said to hand it to you, then forget I ever saw it." Hayes didn't plug it in. He took it to the secure room and documented every second of its chain like a man signing for explosives. The next sunrise, they were back on the range to re-zero. Bad nights shift sights even when they don't. Mick set the M249 on sandbags, fired in slow 10-round strings, and clicked 2 notches. Briggs shot paper until the holes made a neat stack where the X used to be. Hayes put 3 rounds into 3 squares and wrote "OK" in the margin. JT tuned glass and confirmed dope. Drew worked through a plate rack until the clangs ran like a metronome. No one talked much. The sound of hits said what needed saying. At lunch, the major stopped by their table with a folder and an expression that tried not to be human. He failed for a second and let the human show. "Good work," he said, which covered more ground than the 2 words should. He set the folder down. "One more thing." The net picked up a burst at 0500. "Not ours. Not theirs. A single line." He read it without looking at the page. "Tell the medic he did fine. Tell the gunner to oil the feed tray cover hinge. Tell the scout to stop taking the long flank when he's bleeding. Tell the captain to trust his first route. And tell the second that he was right about the saddle." He closed the folder. Then it went quiet. Drew didn't ask how it got routed to their frequency. He didn't ask who decided to pass it along. He just nodded. We'll pass it to the people who need to hear it. That night the team gathered in the bay without being told. No ceremony. Just 6 chairs, one empty where Johnson would put his later. Mick raised a paper cup, not to toast, but to mark the hour. To the ridge, he said. Hayes added, to the seconds. Briggs, to the shots that mattered. JT kept it simple. To the ones who show up. Drew finished it. To the work. They drank coffee that had sat too long and didn't complain. In the end, the lesson wasn't mystical or grand. It was this: planning gets you to the edge, discipline keeps you on your feet, and sometimes a stranger's precision gives you the inches you can't find yourself. You don't ask for it. You don't expect it. You don't build a plan around it. But you accept it when it comes, and you pay it forward the next time you're the one with a lane and a clean shot that makes someone else's morning possible. Drew wrote that down in the back of a notebook he rarely used. He closed it, put it in his locker, and went back to the range to help Hayes pack targets. A wind came down off the hills and stirred the dust. Somewhere far west, the redwoods kept their own weather and their own rules. A rifle might have been resting under a tarp, wiped down, bolt forward. A woman might have been watching a different tree lean, counting a different set of seconds for people she didn't know. Or maybe she was asleep on a ridge with her back to stone, trusting a quiet that she had earned. The team didn't chase the mystery. They moved on to the next brief, the next map, the next hard line on a wall where you pin your route and hope the ground lets you keep it. They left room in their plan for luck but didn't count on it. And when the radio stayed quiet, they worked like it always would. When it crackled with that clean, unhurried voice again, they'd listen. Not because they needed a legend, but because sometimes the voice in the dark is just another professional doing the work, one shot at a time. And if anyone ever asked them what saved their night in Redwood Valley, they'd answer the only way that felt honest. Training, stubbornness, and a ghost with perfect aim. Then they'd shoulder their packs and head for the gate, because stories are good, but boots and routes and seconds are better. The chapter was over. The book wasn't.